So we hear the same readings every Palm Sunday, interestingly, other than the Gospels that rotate, the two Gospels that rotate, first reading, response, and second reading. And so they're obviously very powerful and significant. The Psalm even, we hear that, Psalm 22, those words that Jesus quotes on the cross, not in Luke's Gospel, but one of the other synoptics. And remember, when they would quote a psalm, in the time of Jesus, they didn't have them numbered. So one of the ways you referred to a psalm was by the first line. So we want to remember when Jesus referred to that Psalm 22, that it was a reference to the whole psalm, and the psalm ends in praise. We got a little bit of it in even what we heard today in the response. But so I would encourage you to read that Psalm 22 and see where it ends. And Jesus would have known, hey, people would know this whole psalm. This isn't just one phrase I'm using. I'm referring to this whole psalm. So encourage you to remember that. And then the psalm we always hear on Good Friday is, "Into your hands I commend my spirit," Psalm 31, which of course, Jesus, we heard today, that quote from the cross as well. So, but the Philippians, I want to just make one other comment with. And we hear that great reading, I'm sure familiar with it, right? Christ Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave. He humbled himself, and then death on a cross, right? So that this idea is something to be grasped. It's the Greek word is actually to snatch. It's a stronger word, almost with a physical violence. And it's interesting because it's the word that's used in Greek mythology for what the mythical hero Prometheus does in taking the fire from heaven. If you remember that Greek mythology, which would have been prominent at the time of Jesus, and certainly represented the Greco-Roman kind of pagan worldview. And so this idea was that humanity had to snatch that fire, that divinity from God, because he wasn't going to share it with them, right? There was this antagonistic kind of relationship between the gods and humanity. And Prometheus was the one to lead the revolt to take divinity from the heavens. And that was a way that worldview saw things. And we could still see that worldview in some of the antagonism that humanity has with God, whether it's, atheists or even those who seem to go even beyond not believing in God, but kind of this hatred against the concept of God or whatever that could be. And that's why this concept of Christianity, completely blows that worldview out of the water, right? It says, and we could see even in the Judeo-Christian tradition, this temptation too to want to be snatching divinity from God, right? We see that represented right at the original sin, Adam and Eve, snatching that apple, wanting to be like gods, right? As Satan would tell them, the serpent, he told you not to do that because he doesn't want you to be like him. Oh, well then let's snag it, right? And that leads to our fall. And then in the Tower of Babel, in a few chapters later in Genesis, right? They're trying to build their way to heaven again. Let's snatch divinity from God. And God's, just trying to say, no. That's where everything goes wrong, right? Just, surrender and let me give it to you. And that's what he does in Jesus Christ. That's the mind-blowing reality of our Christian faith, that our God, just chooses not to grasp or snatch or hold on to that divinity. He actually wants to share it. And he was willing to empty himself and become human, to go the opposite of antagonism, right? To pour himself out for us so that we can share in that divinity. So that's what he wants to offer us once again this Holy Week. And that's the Messiah who comes to us. And that's why we should, with the rocks, shout, right? We should shout out, Hosanna in the highest. Blessed are you who come in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, King of David, right? Whatever ways we do that this week, that's the only appropriate response for this worldview of Christianity. that has a God that wants to share his divinity and not force us to fight him for it or try to snatch it from him. When we're willing to be humble like him and just receive it as he wants to give it and not as we want it. And so, yes, let's be awed by that incredible worldview, that incredible God that we know to be the God, our God, the only God, who is our Messiah, who comes to us this Holy Week again. And let's truly greet him with our songs of praise, our shouts of exaltation. Let's make sure that the rocks are not the only ones shouting his praise this Holy Week.